Inside the mind of a WWII general, what separates a good general from a legendary one, especially under the unimaginable pressure of a world at war? Is it the number of tanks they have? The quality of their intelligence? Or is it something deeper, something seated in the very core of their character? The Second World War was a global conflict of steel and fire, but it was ultimately decided by the complexities of the human mind. The generals who led the Allies to victory weren't a monolith cut from the same cloth. They were a clashing collection of egos, brilliant strategists, and powerful personalities, each with a distinct psychological profile that shaped their decisions, and in turn, the fate of the world. This isn't a story about troop movements and battle lines in isolation. We're going inside the minds of the men who shouldered the fate of the free world. We'll explore the core psychological traits that defined them, from the profound, calculated calm that could steady a collapsing front, to the relentless, aggressive drive that could shatter an enemy's will to fight. We'll even examine the quiet strength of radical humility, a trait that seems counterintuitive in a five-star general, yet proved essential to victory. These mental traits, as much as troop numbers or industrial might, were the real weapons that decided the future of civilization. One man was a master of calm, shouldering the weight of the entire Allied war effort with quiet, unflappable resolve. Another was a force of nature, a flamboyant warrior who believed he had lived past lives as a soldier and saw battle as his ultimate destiny. On the surface, Dwight Eisenhower and George Patton couldn't be more different, and yet both were legendary winners, architects of the Allied triumph. So what was their secret? It wasn't just their tanks, their armies, or their grand strategies. It was a battle-hardened mindset, a psychological edge honed in the crucible of total war. We're going inside the minds of the generals who won World War II to uncover the psychological traits that separated the good from the immortal. The weight of the world, calculated calm. Let's begin with a trait that is perhaps the most difficult for any leader to master. Calculated calm. This isn't merely the absence of panic. It's the profound ability to maintain absolute clarity of thought, to process enormous amounts of conflicting information, and to make sound judgments when you are surrounded by chaos, uncertainty, and crushing responsibility. And no one embodied this more than the Supreme Allied Commander himself, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Picture the scene. Early June 1944. The largest amphibious invasion in history. Operation Overlord is coiled and ready to launch across the English Channel. Over 2 million soldiers, thousands of ships, and an air armada are poised to strike. The liberation of Europe and the lives of tens of thousands hang in the balance. But a storm, one of the worst in the English Channel in a century, is churning the sea into a violent, impassable barrier. The decision to go on June 5th or to postpone rests on the shoulders of one man. This was the crucible where Eisenhower's psychological strength was tested like never before. His leadership wasn't defined by dramatic speeches or theatrical displays of authority. It was a quiet, intensely reflective process. In the tense days and hours leading up to the invasion, Eisenhower didn't isolate himself. He created a space for rigorous debate, seeking out a wide range of opinions and listening intently to his commanders. His chief meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, presented a deeply troubling forecast, predicting violent winds and low cloud cover that would make the landings impossible. His air commander, Trafford Lee Mallory, feared the cloud cover would lead to massive casualties among the paratroopers and urged him to delay. Others, like the aggressive General Montgomery, pushed to go, fearing a loss of momentum. Eisenhower absorbed all of this conflicting advice, calmly balancing weather reports, intelligence on German positions, and staggering logistical challenges. This wasn't just data gathering. It was an act of supreme emotional regulation. He knew he had to stabilize not only the anxieties of his staff, but also his own. He was known to write in his journal to process his thoughts, a private ritual to manage the immense, almost unbearable pressure. He needed a full moon for his paratroopers, a low tide to expose German beach obstacles, and calm enough seas for the landing craft. The original date, June 5th, was now impossible due to the storm. A delay of 2 weeks would mean losing the element of surprise and perfect tidal conditions. Then Stagg's team saw a small window, a brief lull in the storm system. Predicted for June 6th, the conditions would be far from ideal. Winds would be high and seas rough, but they might be just good enough. The ultimate proof of Eisenhower's mindset was a press release he secretly wrote by hand on June 5th, to be issued in case the invasion failed. It read, "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. That note, with a slight error dating it July instead of June in a rare slip of the pen, reveals a mind that had already achieved a state of extreme ownership. He had calmly faced the possibility of total, catastrophic failure and accepted full, solitary responsibility before a single boot hit the beach. Finally, after hours of deliberation, pacing as his staff watched in silence, he stopped. The tension seemed to drain from his face, and he gave the simple, fateful order. "Okay, we'll go." This wasn't a gamble. It was a decision born of calculated calm, a psychological resilience that allowed him to see the strategic goal beyond the immediate chaos and risk. That mental process, the ability to find a moment of stillness and clarity in the heart of the storm, launched the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The force of nature, relentless drive. If Eisenhower was the calm center of the storm, our next psychological trait is the storm itself, a relentless, aggressive, and forward-moving drive. This is the mindset that sees only one direction, forward. It's an unshakable belief in constant momentum and an offensive spirit that aims not just to defeat the enemy, but to shatter their will to resist. And its most famous and infamous champion was General George S. Patton. Patton was a warrior who seemed born in the wrong century, a man who believed in reincarnation and was convinced he had fought in battles throughout history as a soldier. His leadership was a spectacle of fiery speeches laden with profanity, a hot temper, and a brutally simple philosophy. Attack, attack, and if in doubt, attack again. After the D-Day breakout in August 1944, his newly activated Third Army became a blur on the map, a testament to his relentless drive. While other Allied forces were bogged down in the dense hedgerows of Normandy, Patton unleashed a style of American blitzkrieg. His armored columns bypassed strongpoints, flanked German positions, and raced across France at a stunning pace, sometimes covering hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks. His troops moved so fast that they constantly outran their supply lines, creating a massive logistical crisis that Eisenhower had to solve. This led to the creation of the Red Ball Express, a massive, continuous truck convoy system, staffed primarily by African-American soldiers, that worked 24/7 to haul fuel and ammunition to Patton's spearheads. At its peak, the Red Ball Express operated nearly 6,000 vehicles, delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily just to keep Patton's tanks rolling. German commanders who faced him later admitted that Patton was the Allied general they feared most, because he understood maneuver warfare and the psychology of pursuit on a visceral level. Where Eisenhower was the master politician and coalition builder, Patton was the pure warrior, a sledgehammer to Eisenhower's scalpel. His job wasn't diplomacy, it was to smash whatever was in front of him, and his entire psychology was tuned for that one purpose. He didn't connect with troops through quiet empathy, but by firing up their pride and fighting spirit, inspiring them to push past what they thought were their physical and mental limits. But this relentless drive wasn't just about one man's personality. The German military had its own version, baked into a philosophy called Auftragstaktik, or mission-type tactics. Born in the 19th century and perfected for the Blitzkrieg, this doctrine was revolutionary. Instead of giving rigid, detailed orders, senior commanders gave their junior officers the mission's intent, the ultimate goal, but granted them the freedom to decide how to achieve it. This decentralized approach fueled incredible speed, initiative, and flexibility, allowing German units to exploit battlefield opportunities with ruthless efficiency in the early years of the war. So you have two models of aggression. Patton's was a top-down force of will, driven by his overpowering, charismatic, and often volatile personality. Auftragstaktik was a bottom-up philosophy, embedding aggressive initiative throughout the chain of command, trusting subordinates to act. Yet, both had their flaws. Patton's relentless drive often created logistical chaos and friction with other commanders, and Auftragstaktik, without a steady strategic hand from the top, could lead to tactical brilliance in the service of strategic disaster, like the catastrophic overextension in Russia in 1941. It makes you wonder, is it better for that aggressive drive to come from one person's singular genius, or from a deeply ingrained system? These psychological clashes, the calm strategist versus the aggressive warrior, helped define the war. If you're fascinated by the psychology of leadership under pressure, take a second to subscribe and hit that bell icon. We've got more stories of the minds behind the machines on the way. Now, what about the generals who weren't forces of nature, but were the quiet, indispensable architects of victory? The quiet architects, radical humility and adaptability. The final traits we'll look at might sound counterintuitive for a 4-star general leading men in combat. Radical humility and adaptability. This isn't about being meek or indecisive. It's a profound kind of strength. It's having the intellectual confidence to listen, the wisdom to empower your team, and the mental flexibility to change the plan when it isn't working. This was the mindset of the quiet architects of victory. Take General Omar Bradley, famously known as the WWII General. In an arena crowded with monumental egos like Patton and Montgomery, Bradley was unassuming, analytical, and courteous. His style of leadership, what we might now call servant leadership, was a stark contrast to his peers. He put the needs and welfare of his soldiers first, believing that no commander can become a strategist until he first knows his men. Bradley's genius was in building a cohesive team and unleashing his subordinates' talent. He would often let his junior officers brief battle plans in front of senior staff, only stepping in to gently correct facts about enemy strength, never to publicly humiliate or embarrass them. He knew that killing a subordinate's confidence was a sure way to kill their initiative. By delegating authority and fostering a culture of open communication, he created a command climate that was completely different from the more autocratic generals. His command wasn't a pyramid with him at the apex. It was a network of empowered thinkers, a style that earned him the deep respect of the soldiers in the field. This mindset of intellectual humility was personified at the highest strategic level by General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff. Marshall was the architect of the entire American war effort, turning a small, unprepared army into a globe-spanning force of over 8 million soldiers. Hailed by Winston Churchill as the organizer of victory, his leadership was a remarkable balance of quiet authority and inclusiveness. He actively encouraged dissent and debate from his staff before a decision was made, because he understood it was the only way to pressure test a plan and make it stronger. His biggest test of strategic resolve was holding firm to the Germany first strategy. Despite immense political and public pressure to shift resources to the Pacific to avenge Pearl Harbor, Marshall never wavered. He was convinced that defeating Germany was the most direct path to total victory, and it required incredible political patience and generosity toward the Allies to hold the Grand Coalition together. But once all sides were heard and a final decision was made, he demanded absolute unity and execution. Marshall's humility wasn't about putting himself down. It was the intellectual honesty to find the best ideas, no matter where they came from, and the strategic wisdom to see the bigger picture, even when it wasn't popular. After the war, this same thinking led him to champion the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe and for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Men like Bradley and Marshall proved that in the chaos of war, the most powerful mind isn't always the loudest or most flamboyant. Sometimes, it's the one quiet enough to listen, humble enough to trust others, and adaptable enough to change course. So what was inside the mind of a World War II general? A complex and often contradictory mix of powerful psychological traits. It was Dwight Eisenhower's calculated calm, the immense inner strength to bear the weight of the world and find clarity in a storm of chaos and doubt. It was the relentless drive of a force of nature like George Patton, whose blinding speed broke the back of the German army in France, and the institutionalized aggression of Germany's Auftragstaktik, which empowered initiative at every level. And it was the radical humility of quiet architects like Omar Bradley and George C. Marshall, who understood that true strength lies not in personal glory, but in empowering others and adapting to reality. These were the mental tools that guided armies, navigated fragile alliances, and ultimately won the war. The history of World War II isn't just written in the actions of armies, but in the internal struggles, the psychological fortitude, and the intellectual victories of the commanders who led them. While war is always a brutal, physical act, its ultimate direction is a mental one. So, which of these traits do you think is most critical for a leader in a crisis? The calm strategist, the aggressive driver, or the humble team builder? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.